Hello, my friend. Welcome. I hope you're having an outstanding day. This is Heather. This is the Back to Me podcast. And we are, of course, doing one of my favorite things, talking to an awesome human being about how to find our way to be our best selves in whatever shape, way, form that is for us. And today we're going to talk about, one of those things that we all talk about all the time, and yet we still don't know it all and we still don't do it right. I know I don't. So we're talking to Jinan Banna. Yes, is that right?
That's
Yes.
correct.
And you are a registered dietitian. Hello and welcome.
Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you. I do have to say, I love the birds in the background. So, you guys listening, you're not imagining. These are birds singing happily in the background. And because you're in Hawaii, right?
That is correct.
They're so happy down there. They're like, who wouldn't be happy singing being in Hawaii, right?
Yes, it's paradise.
Yeah, exactly. So, one of the things I'm always curious about when I talk to people is what, what drew you into wanting to be a dietitian and down this road of helping people with being healthy through eating.
I would say there were two main things. First would be my mother. She always had a big interest in nutrition, and I remember growing up, we always had to read food labels and be very cognizant of what we were eating. She
Wow.
used to love to go to the food co-op and was very enthusiastic about food in general. So I really grew up with this love of food and an interest in food. And I would say the second thing would be the death of a close family member due to cancer,
Oh,
sadly. So I
wow.
have one happy story and one not so happy story.
Yeah.
And I would say that that really spurred my interest in preventing chronic disease through diet and helping others to do so. That's definitely a big issue that we see here in Hawaii. Definitely, many students that I teach have family members who suffer from diabetes or heart disease. So, this prevention of chronic disease through diet is really something very near and dear to me and important for many of our students here, too.
Right. Yeah. Your mom was super cutting edge. Like, I don't know that my mom ever read a label, which is interesting. So awesome that you like had it from a young age, and from the chronic like cancers and diabetes. How like I don't actually remember off the top of my head what the number one cause of death is these days, but I feel like the top causes of mortality these days is really related to lifestyle. Do you find that in your research?
Yes, definitely. So we know that the leading causes of death, such as heart disease, are quite related to diet and other lifestyle factors. And that's why it's so exciting to be in the nutrition field.
Right, these things we can actually prevent.
That's
And
right.
I'm so like I'm why don't you think people pay more attention to that? Is it they don't know or too much information or
I think about it really as a systems issue, unfortunately. We really have a system that sets us up for difficulty when it comes to making healthy choices. And we know that making the healthy choice is not the easy choice in our current system. We have really highly palatable, cheap, unhealthy foods, ultra processed foods like things like chips and candy and cookies, very available to us. And we know that healthy foods often are quite unavailable, especially for certain populations. So that's really the main thing that we need to think about. Of course, education is one piece of it, but I would say that that's definitely not the main piece. And what we really want to be doing is looking at how we can start to change our system, which is not an easy task.
no? It would probably be way easier to, have it available, have the education than to change the way that food is made available. And I can remember having a conversation, and you probably have an opinion on this about food scientists doing so much experimentation to make it so we can't resist these foods. They study the taste and the texture and apparently umami is a new thing. I don't know. Maybe it's not new. Maybe I just heard about it. But it's almost like we're helpless.
Certainly, we have foods that are extremely high in sugar, for example, and sodium, high in fat, and they're very highly palatable and very readily available to us. So, on top of that, we have marketing that is very misleading. This is something I share with my students quite a bit. Cartons of juice that are not actually juice, cartons with pictures of an orange on the front that have absolutely no juice. So things of this nature really don't help us, and we really have to be very savvy consumers, unfortunately. It shouldn't be that way, but it is.
Right? I can remember an ad I saw once, and I mean, my husband and I joke about it. It's these two elderly ladies on a bench, and one of them turns to the other and says, "What's wrong with high fructose corn syrup?" And that was it. So then it plants in your head, yeah, what is wrong with it? And you never go to find out. It's just like that. They've secretly planted into your head a doubt that there's anything wrong with it. So, of course, you're going to go eat it. And I find it interesting. And this is, I don't have, I know I don't have as much knowledge as you, but at some point, I feel like when fat became the enemy, that they just replaced fat with sugar, which actually made things worse.
Definitely, we know the levels of sugar in our food, now and in the past has been really astronomical. If you look at certain foods, for example, you can really see that. Yogurt is a prime example. If you look at the number of grams of added sugar in some of the yogurts on the shelf, it's
Wow.
pretty crazy. And you can have a very enjoyable experience with yogurt by purchasing the plain yogurt and then perhaps adding some fruit. And if you need a little sweetness, maybe a tiny bit of honey on the top. So it's really unfortunate that we pretty much are subject to what's out there on the market, and we just have to defend ourselves in
Right.
the supermarket.
It's interesting how we go through these trends where, fat is bad for you, fat is good for you. Now there seems to be a lot of plant-based, everything should be plant-based, you should stop eating this and that. Is there any evidence that there's people who shouldn't eat meat or should eat meat, or can you like it's so like there's so much information on the internet, and Dr. Google will tell you the whatever answer you want, right?
Very true. Yes, I would think about this really in terms of the basic principles of healthy eating. So
Mm-hmm.
it's not so much about eating meat or not eating meat, but more about getting all of the essential nutrients, all of our macronutrients, our protein, carbohydrates, fat, and thinking about our vitamins and minerals, our micronutrients as well, balancing between the different food groups and eating a variety of foods. So it's thinking more along these lines that is helpful. And of course, meat can be part of a healthy diet, but it doesn't have to be. We know that a vegetarian or a vegan diet can be extremely healthy. Every diet needs to be planned carefully to make sure that you're getting everything you need and not too much of things that you don't need, such as the sugar and salt that we talked about, our saturated fat. So it's more about thinking along those lines. And then there are, of course, many other considerations, such as environmental considerations and cultural. So it's really not a straightforward answer in terms of what each person should be consuming, but it's more a question of thinking about the particular person and the context in which they live.
Right, right. And um, is there a good amount of sugar?
We generally want to limit our sugar intake. So recommendation is about no more than 25 grams or so per day. So it's not a large amount of sugar, really. If we look at one particular product, we might find that we have about that amount of sugar just in one serving of a particular food. So what I generally strive to do is to purchase products with as little added sugar as possible, and oftentimes, most of the time, with no added sugar. I find that I really don't need added sugar hardly at all. So I might
Right.
purchase things like dried fruits if I want something really sweet. I'm a big fan of those, and they're like a dessert for me. So that's one of my favorite things. And as I mentioned, things like yogurt and fruit can be quite satisfying. They add a little bit of sweetness. So you can see I'm mentioning fruit a few times here.
Yes,
This is a
I and
great
there's a
source of
picture of
sugar.
fruit in your logo.
Yeah, it's just an excellent dessert, really. Everybody likes, most people like sweet things, where, we have so much of it available to us. And it's nice to be able to find alternatives that are also satisfying. And there are many other things that we can consider doing with fruit, besides just eating it as is. Banana bread, I like to make such a thing, and perhaps add some different things to it to increase fiber, to use whole wheat flour, and sometimes
Right.
I add matcha powder to increase my antioxidant intake. So you can really get creative with it and think of different ways to consume sweets without too much added sugar.
I think if I had matcha in my banana bread, I wouldn't sleep.
Yeah, you do have to be careful about that. So I'm very conscious of the timing when it comes to consumption of matcha.
Yeah, exactly. Although I love matcha, but woo, because I don't drink coffee, it can really wind me up. It's interesting. So I guess part of the barrier for people is, I mean, you mentioned earlier, your diet needs to be carefully planned, but people are so overwhelmed, and convenience. I've said it to so many people, convenience is killing us. I mean, it's super convenient to do just grab a, oh my God, don't even talk about Hungry Man meals, but go to the fast food, all of those places where it's like, I just need to eat, I just need to get through this, I just need to, and I'll look after it later, and then you don't. And do you do you have ways to help people kind of be able to plan without feeling overwhelmed? Is there an easy approach to it?
Yes, I help them to make small changes. That's really the key. So I like to know where people are starting. I take an inventory of what they might eat over a typical day. And then we talk about perhaps adding one serving of vegetables at lunch if they don't eat any vegetables. And I am fully aware that we live in a system that makes it very challenging for us. So it's really not an individual problem, it's a systems problem. So we really struggle to figure out how to work within this system. And the key is just to make change little by little and to see if there's some easy ways to perhaps have your veggies on hand in the freezer. I talk about that a lot because sometimes we just, as you said, become overwhelmed. There's no time left. And thinking about having some healthy snacks on hand may also help. So things that can fit in our day and make it a little easier for us to eat well.
Right. And yeah, and I mean, you were mentioning earlier, I mean, it is very individual because there's taste, there is preferences, there is, I guess, allergies to be concerned. I've just noticed, like, at some point, gluten intolerance wasn't a thing when I was in school, when I was a kid. And of course, neither was peanut allergies, really. What did you take to school? Peanut butter. But do you think it's our food system that's creating this intolerance, or was it always around and just not identified?
Yeah, we may have greater awareness these days and more testing happening. And of course, we have both celiac disease to be concerned about and then gluten intolerance, which is less well understood. So we have multiple issues along these lines that to be considered, and it is still a relatively small proportion of our population that suffers from this. So we really do want to be cognizant of that and remember that not everybody needs to eat gluten-free products, and that sometimes these products actually are not as nutritious as the products that contain gluten. So we want to
Right.
be aware of
That's
marketing.
it's interesting you say that. I mean, like I have friends who are celiac, so I understand that yes, there are some people who are definitely should not, cannot digest gluten, and then and maybe it's just how Facebook and Google curates your feed for you. It's, everybody, or not everyone, it's quite often to hear, gluten intolerance, and you would think that half of the world was gluten intolerant by the number of products that have been created and the number of things that you see posted in the information. But it is interesting when you look at those things, they're not necessarily nutritious. And I'm remembering way back when a friend of mine was vegetarian because it was a healthy diet, and her diet was terrible. Because just because you don't eat meat doesn't mean your diet is healthy. And then I'm reminded of the Beyond, I'm not going to name them, the people who make not real meat. I read the label of it and I just thought, oh my goodness, I would rather eat real meat, right? And I guess it's what you say. I mean, you have to take some time for yourself to look at your labels.
Definitely. And it's not really a straightforward answer in terms of whether or not to consume these alternative products rather than consuming meat, because there are so many considerations. Of course, these products do have some beneficial nutritional properties. They provide protein, they're an alternative protein source, and they contain some of our micronutrients such as iron, but they also can be quite high in sodium, quite high in saturated fat. They may have additives, and we still need more information about how they impact the environment. So
Oh,
there's a lot
yes.
more to be known really about that. And it's not straightforward. It also, of course, depends on your taste preferences. So that's another
Right.
big factor. I'm not a picky eater at all, and some of these products don't taste very good to me. So that's unusual for me
Right.
and says something.
And yeah, it's interesting. And I guess we lose touch a little bit with knowing. I think about healthy eating and knowing when you're hungry and what your body needs. I can remember as a little kid, I didn't like cheese. But then as I grew up, I was like, "Oh, I've got to eat cheese. I've got to eat cheese." So I developed the ability to eat cheese, or the taste for it, where I actually enjoyed it. Then I found out I couldn't digest whey. So I was like, "Okay, so maybe this little kid in me didn't like cheese because I actually it my body as a little kid, you don't have all these other variables. You're like, no, I don't want that. Instead of being labeled a picky eater. So, do you find that it's difficult for people to get back in touch with with the physical knowledge of their body and their body knowing when they're hungry and what to eat when and
Yes, one of the main things that comes to mind when you're talking about this is the fact that sometimes we're not getting everything we need from our diet, and that may lead us to, for example, feel hungry quite a lot. So, if we
mm,
have a diet, for example, that's insufficient in fiber, we know that most Americans don't get enough fiber, then we might be feeling hungry quite a bit of the time. And similarly, if we have a diet that for example, doesn't contain enough protein, which is not common in the US. If you're eating a standard American diet, typically you do get enough, but depending on your diet, you may not get enough. And this is another thing that can leave you feeling quite hungry. So it can be difficult when we're talking about getting in touch with how we're feeling and responding appropriately to our signals. We need to make sure the basics are in place so that we have the right diet to support us and to leave us feeling satisfied so that we don't have these sensations all the time and want to constantly eat. So there are a whole host of things to consider, I think, when it comes to um, feeling what's going on in our body. And we want to really start with the basics and make sure that we are eating in line with our preferences and our needs, taking into account any allergies and other
right.
issues.
And yes, fiber. It's interesting. So, what is the fiber that people should be getting?
So, fiber is a carbohydrate in our food that passes through undigested. And so, we find fiber in fruits and vegetables, in beans, in whole grains, in nuts, in a whole host of foods. And essentially, we want to be consuming a variety of those plant based foods to be able to get enough fiber.
How much is enough?
So, enough we can think about as there are different recommendations for men and women, but one way to think about it would be 14 grams per thousand calories that we consume per day. So, based on your energy intake, is one way to think about it. So, you can
Right.
start to think if you consume a 2,000 calorie diet about how much fiber you would be consuming.
Right. And I guess part of the inconvenience of convenience foods is do do they contain fiber generally?
Yeah, that's right. It's a great consideration, and many times these ultra processed foods have very little to no fiber.
Right. And I guess on the flip side, how much do you think the average North American gets? I'm including Canada just because but maybe it's not that global a stat. But in general, are people even getting half of what they need?
I'm not sure the exact numbers as to how much people are consuming, but I know that in the US, research demonstrates that nearly 100% of Americans are not meeting the recommendation. So they're certainly under
Just for
that.
fiber. which it doesn't feel to me like fiber would be all that hard a thing for people to get on track. But maybe I'm mistaken.
Yeah, I could, from a nutritionist perspective, pretty easily see how people can reach that point if we think about the standard American diet, which might be quite deficient in fruits and vegetables and not contain a lot of these plant-based foods, be pretty heavy on meat and a lot of processed, many different types of processed foods, including foods containing carbohydrates such as rice and bread, if we're consuming white rice and white bread, for example, and a lot of these snack foods that may not have a lot of
Right.
fiber. It's
It's
easy to
funny
do.
that people like to have, I guess it's almost like easy things to remember. I knew a woman once who went on a diet where she ate nothing that was white. So that was like, okay. I was trying to figure out how it worked, but she just said, well, and I guess for her that was just easy. Is it white? No, I'm not going to eat it. So it was the white rice or white bread, I guess milk, soft cheeses, things like that. And she must have somehow compensated by adding things that had more fiber because she did feel better. But it's funny how we come up with these funny little diets. Nothing white. I'm going to do this today. I'm going to do that today. The cabbage diet. Oh my goodness. So hilarious. I,
It
I,
is.
I think that if we would endlessly we would be you could start a podcast evaluating each fad diet and you would probably go on for years and years and years.
I think so. And I'd probably amuse myself quite a bit.
Right? I don't know if you've heard of Dr. Jason Fung, Fung.
Yes.
Yes. So I read his book, the I think I read the Diabetic Code, where he had done a kind of broad research of all the fad diets, and he said they all work and then they all don't work because none of them are sustainable. So it's like, all right, so it's we should just stop trying to get something fancy and just eat properly.
Certainly. Yes, completely true. I think we really forget those basics. I like to go back to the basic principles because I think we get fixated on particular foods and we really need to focus on that variety, not getting too much of what we don't need and getting enough of what we do need.
We want the superfood, the magic pill. So if you were going to lay out the basics are
So a good way to really visualize it would be to look at myplate.gov. I really like the graphic there, the MyPlate graphic. It has a plate graphic and shows that about half the plate should be fruit and vegetable. We have a serving of protein, a serving of whole grains. Dairy is included there. Of course, there are alternatives to dairy if people do not want to consume that. The foods that are included within the plate can look very different from for each person, from person to person. But I think that's a great way to think about balancing between the various food groups, getting different foods in each groups, and we don't see those ultra processed foods pictured there. Of course, they can be included, but in moderation.
right. Yeah. And I think moderation, the term moderation has evolved over time to, oh, moderation is once a day instead of, once in a while.
That's true. Yeah, and it's I find it difficult. Sometimes I struggle a little bit with this idea that all foods can fit. Of course, this is an idea that I promote as a dietitian, and I do think that's true. It is fine to have everything in moderation. However, you know, there are certain foods I really wish would not exist, such
Oh,
as,
like what?
soda, things like this. I mean, sure, if you're going to have a soda every once in a while, it's fine. You'll be fine. But, it's unfortunate that we have soda in the first place.
Right. That's uh, that's interesting. I actually stopped drinking soda a long time ago, but before I did, I was drinking diet soda, and then one day I said, "Well, why even bother? Either have the real thing or nothing at all," because I just felt like I didn't want to put the things that were trying to trick me into thinking that I was having sugar, because then that would just mess with my poor brain and my poor body going, I wanted sugar. What is this? Right.
Yeah, it's really desirable to, choose other items in general. Sometimes I like to drink unsweetened iced tea. I add some lime, sparkling water. Sometimes I add a little bit of apple cider vinegar to it. It might be, some people might
That's
find
a
it
little
an odd
intense.
combination, but I add just a little bit. And for me, it adds a little bit of sweetness. I really enjoy it. So it's all about finding what works for you and
Well,
avoiding.
I also think that because I've noticed for myself as I made choices and decisions and altered my diet didn't used to be very good at all. I will fully own up to that. You through university, oh my gosh, forget about it. But I think that at first you think this is horrible, this is terrible, this is awful, I can't stand any of this food. But I think that your taste will change over time. Like you're mentioning, oh, just this tiny little bit of this. And someone who puts 3 or 4 sugars, and I'm not naming any names to my brothers, into their coffee, you know, slowly decreasing it, you can change your taste profile and actually make it so that you don't need those things. But we never give ourselves that grace of time to make those adjustments.
Yeah, I think it's a really good point, and we can try to decrease little by little and see how it goes. I do note that when I taste something super sweet, every once in a while I take a little taste of something if I'm out and somebody offers me something, and I think to myself, ugh, it had so much sugar, it's too much.
Right. Yeah. I remember I know they have them in the US, all those Frappuccino, cappuccinos with all the things in them. And people think, I'm just going for a coffee. But my husband, at one point, he was having them regularly. And he and his coworkers called it candy. Let's go to the coffee shop and get some candy. And then I think he went and read the nutritional facts and thought, oh my gosh. So he actually slowly over time changed. So now he just drinks his coffee completely black with nothing added to it. But a lot of people don't want to go through that process of the time to adjust.
That's true. It's difficult, and I think that's excellent that he can do that. I, enjoy my coffee with milk, and I find that actually it's quite satisfying. I often choose soy milk or oat milk, and they taste really good. They have a nice creamy mouthfeel, and
And soy milk and oat milk, even if you buy the unsweetened kind, I still find there's a little bit of a sweetness to them, right?
yeah, me too. Yeah, it's really
Because I don't
pleasant.
eat very much sugar, so I just find, yeah, I can taste the little sweetness in them. Now, speaking about one of my favorite topics, which is chocolate. People who have watched me know that I live for chocolate. And I only eat dark chocolate, but I was shocked recently when they said that dark chocolate's now bad for you.
Yeah, so there was a recent article, I think it was in Time magazine, pretty sure, about the heavy metals in chocolate in the 85% or more. And so really it goes back to this concept of choosing a variety of foods. It's not to
Right.
say that we shouldn't have any chocolate or other foods that contain heavy metals, but
Thank
that
goodness.
we, yeah, right. But simply that we should be aware of our portion size and we should be including a variety of foods. That's really what it comes down to.
And portion sizes. So and I don't know if you have this from I'm on the Canadian side of the border. We call things in the restaurant American sized portions. When we go to restaurants, oh, that was an American sized portion. Because I feel like the plates have been getting bigger and bigger and bigger. Maybe it'll go backwards now with the economy and everything and, start shrinking back down. But it's hard, I guess, for people to understand how big portions are if you haven't taken that time to measure it out. And then you might feel like, oh my God, how can I survive on that much food?
Hmm. Definitely. I think a good way to think about it too is really thinking about hunger signals. So, monitoring how you feel, eating slowly, and trying to stop when you're about 80% full, and having that balanced diet, that's really key so that you're not feeling hungry all the time. If you eat a big plate of foods that contain simple carbohydrate, a lot of that white bread, white rice, and that's all you're eating, you're probably not going to feel very satisfied and it will be hard to gauge your hunger signals. So,
That's why you're always hungry after Chinese food.
yeah, a lot of these sugars that are added and simple carbs really don't do anything for you. So,
Right.
It's true.
Although, a little Chinese food every now and then, it's so good. The Oh my gosh, my head just went right out of my head, whatever that was. So for you were talking about macronutrients. Do you find that I find it a lot of work to follow a macro diet,
Yeah, and I
and
would say there's no real reason to focus too much on the exact quantities of the different macronutrients. We know that we do have ranges in terms of the recommendations for protein, carbohydrate, and fat. So you have some flexibility. You'll want to think about meeting your needs in each one of those categories. So in terms of protein, you can do a calculation, zero point 0.8 grams per kilogram of body weight per day to see what your protein requirement is. That's a good place to start. See whether you're meeting that. In the category of carbohydrates, you can look at your fiber intake as a good thing to note, as that's where people are oftentimes not getting enough.
right?
And you can also start to think about, in the fat category, your essential fats. These are fats that our body cannot make and we must obtain in the diet, our omega-3s and our omega-6. So these are some considerations in each category, and there is some flexibility there.
Yeah, I know you because I think you've written for MyFitnessPal,
Yeah, I'm oftentimes quoted in such outlets.
right? I have MyFitnessPal, and at one point I was trying to do a macro focused diet, but I found it was really challenging to follow the macros the way that they laid it out. It's like, no, you're supposed to be in this number today. I'm like, but I can't.
Yeah, and I've also seen plans along these lines, and I would say it's much easier to visualize the plate graphic, go from there.
Right? Yeah. And so the plate graphic, is that for each meal or for your whole day?
So that it shows you how to lay out one meal.
Okay.
And so you can go on myplate.gov and get a more detailed plan as well to show you how many servings in each group you should have over the course of the day. And you can start to think about how that maps on to this plate graphic.
Cool. That's awesome. And I know that you have you have a blog post. You have a blog on healthy eating, which is awesome, which is your website. So what's your website?
It's jinanbanna.com. So my name, my full name.com.
And I guess they can link there to the blog, and you also have a free guide for healthy weight loss.
Yes, I do. And it lays out all the basics and helps you start with some small steps.
Start small, right? I say this for pretty much everything that I talk about is start with something small and practice it until you're good at it and then add something new, right? The
Definitely.
New Year's resolutions where you're saying, I'm going to work out for an hour every day, just don't ever work out. And I'm never going
Right.
to eat chocolate again. Those words will never leave my lips.
Yeah. No,
So
that sounds terrible.
I know, what a life. Why bother?
Yeah, right.
And so don't worry, everybody. I'm gonna put links in the show notes for you. So in case you were like, how do I spell that? Don't worry, it's in the show notes, and you'll be able to grab those so you can run over to Janan's and get all that information. And thank you so much. But before you go, because you've given lots of information, and it's okay if you repeat yourself. Do you have a final word of wisdom for people?
Yes, I always love to mention that it's really important to enjoy your food. I think that we get really wrapped up in talking about the nutrients and how to balance the diet, but we want to remember that pleasure in eating is very important. You never want to lose that. It would be sad. So just keep at it and enjoy.
Right? That is so. Thank you for adding that because that's super important. You know, this don't give yourself a hard time and don't feel awful. Just really enjoy what you're going to eat while you're going to eat it. That's awesome.
Definitely.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you so much for having me.
And my friends out in podcast land, go and connect with Janan because we always can learn more about how to be healthy and we got to take care of these bodies, right? Take care, my friends. I will see you